So I'm Clay Kilgore, I'm the director of the Washington County Historical Society, and we are here today at the Whiskey Rebellion Education and Visitor Center.
Let's explore the Bradford House, where the Whiskey Rebellion wasn't just history, it was a breaking point. This is where American whiskey found its voice and pushed back against the very system that tried to control it.
Hi everybody, we are now here at the Bradford House in Washington, Pennsylvania. I'm standing here with Dave. So Dave, why don't you tell everybody who you are and why is this house so important?
Yes, my name is Dave. I'm a senior docent at the Bradford House Museum. This was the epicenter of the infamous Whiskey Rebellion uprising in 1794.
I'm Kate Cunning. I'm a living historian and docent with the David Bradford Museum across the street.
I'm Mike Robinson. I'm the board chair of the Bradford House Historical Association. We're celebrating our 60th year of existence this year.
As a docent and living historian, I aim to show people life in the 18th century in the most authentic and period correct way as possible, and what better way to do that when addressed in 18 layers of 18th century clothes.
So whenever people come into the visitor center, do you kind of walk them around? Is this like self-guided? What does that look like?
It's largely self-guided. If people come in with very little knowledge of the Whiskey Rebellion, I'll be glad to give them a nutshell explanation of what happened, who's involved, what the outcomes were. But yes, it is largely self-guided.
We're in the parlor of the David Bradford House, an important room for David. This house was built in 1788. It's more than 237 years old. It was built largely at the insistence of David Bradford's young wife, who did not want to live with him on his farm east of Washington, PA here, because she was terrified of Indian attacks. You have to realize this is still a frontier town. Washington was less than 200 population, and she did not feel safe living out in the country. Indian raids were a real thing back then. So David agreed to build her a house in town. You have to realize that David was a very wealthy attorney. He had business interests all over the territory. He was a rising political star. He was quite a big shot. He liked to let people know how big a shot he was. So he built this house in the middle of town. It's one of the finest examples of federal architecture west of the Allegheny Mountains, and it was the epicenter of the infamous Whiskey Rebellion that we'll be talking about a little later, I'm sure. We are in the dining room, another important room for David. Again, David was all in the business of impressing people. He was rather legendary for the large dinner parties he would throw here. They would often extend into the garden, which we'll show you. These parties would start about 2 o'clock in the afternoon and go on into the night. Mm-hmm. He'd actually burn candles.
Okay.
Neighbors had 1 candle or 2 candles burned at night, consider themselves lucky. David had dozens of candles he would burn. I'm sure his neighbors talked about him. This room's also important because it's an example, a show place, a show thing to impress, again, visitors. And it's also where the family, of course, had their dinners, where the servants would serve them here. And it would be a very busy room for a variety of things that would be going on most of the time. One of the most intriguing things about this room, though, and it gives you an idea of what's going on throughout the country, too. These side cupboards on either side of the fireplace, they're rare. You won't find them in homes like this. This will be blank space on either side of the fireplace. As you go through the house, you won't find another cupboard, pantry, cupboard, or anything like that. That's because at this point in time, houses were being taxed on a number of chimneys on the roof. David was able to glue all his fireplaces to 1 chimney on the roof. There's some nifty masonry work up in the attic that takes care of that. And there were taxes on a number of rooms in the house. Each one of these cupboards, these 4 cupboards, was taxed in a room. A room is defined for tax purposes as anything with a door that opens into a closed space. David knew that going in, but he wanted to impress the various and sundry people he would invite to these big dinners. Look, I can afford these cupboards here. What he didn't count on, though, was a glass tax that came just a few years later And all 13 panes of glass in each one of those cupboards was taxed, as well as all the panes of glass throughout the house, and the panes of glass in that 13 panes of glass and a fan light over the front door that you came in. Dave was a wealthy guy, could afford this. We showed this just to demonstrate what our young country was doing, plotted by Alexander Hamilton to come up with ways to raise money to eliminate a fantastic debt from the Revolutionary War and to create a country that would be impressive on the world stage. This room's important because this is also where the conspirators gathered to plan the next event on the Whiskey Rebellion Trail, so to speak. It's also where the table sat. There was the infamous robbing of the mail, an incident during the Whiskey Rebellion in which rebels intercepted the mail between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia to determine who the traitors were in Pittsburgh, who were ratting them out, informing on them, and so forth. And that mail was brought here and dumped on the dining room table right here and sorted, eventually packed it together and taken to the Black Horse Tavern in Cannonsburg, where it was finally opened and read to find out who the bad guys were. And that ultimately led to the famous March on Pittsburgh, where up to 7,000 armed rebels, led by our boy David, by the way, marching on Pittsburgh with intent on burning the city down and arresting the bad guys and probably hanging them. Cooler heads finally prevailed. That didn't happen, but it was one of the major event that really caught George Washington's attention.
Yeah.
And he decided it was time to do something about it.
A lot of people ask us, why did people come to the frontier? This was the edge of the country. The Native Americans worked for the British a lot. They worked for anybody who would pay them and give them rifles and whiskey and stuff. But the people who came from England and Scotland and Germany, they were looking for freedom. They were looking for a new place. They landed on the seaboard.
Yeah.
The seaboard had been populated for a couple hundred years. There wasn't any land available. And so when they hit, people would say, we want to buy land, we want to have a farm. And they said, well, you need to go west. If you were serving in the Revolutionary War, the government, printed worthless paper notes, but they'd give you a land grant. And so land was inexpensive, and so people came out here and found that the terrain and the soil and the climate was similar to what they had back home. And you talk about rye whiskey, Scotch and Irish and German knew how to grow rye, and they found it did okay here.
Yeah.
Mike's right. This is a strong Scotch-Irish settlements here for the most part. These are people who pushed around for generations in Europe, fighting high taxes, tyranny, came to this country, fought a revolutionary war against taxes and tyranny, thought they had it made, and then along comes this new government, and taxes are the only source of income here. Basically, this is an income tax to them. And like I said, these people, you don't push these people around too much.
Yeah.
And things kind of exploded from there. Alexander Hamilton came up with a plan to launch a tax on production of whiskey, which flew okay on the other side of the mountains, where they've been around for 200 years, manufacturing whiskey in big distilleries. And here we basically got small boutique distilleries.
Right.
Mike can talk an awful lot more than I can on what the impact was on those small distilleries out here.
Okay.
One of the grievances beyond the tax on whiskey was that the government was not protecting the citizens here.
Okay.
And they were having to trade licks with the Indians. And they did trade licks. There were some atrocities against Indians too. But that's the kind of atmosphere you had here. Government asking you to pay tax on whiskey and aren't protecting you from the Indians. Plus, the fact that if you wanted to go to court, you had to go all the way to Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And you couldn't settle any of these issues about taxes. Here, you had to go 300 miles, 11 days,
Wow.
in the midst of trying to farm and fight off Indians and everything else.
Right.
So I'm just trying to capture the
Absolutely.
atmosphere. And the transportation was horrid. Back to the tax, Alexander Hamilton knew that Pennsylvania had a tax. They tried to raise money for the Revolutionary War,
Yeah.
just as Alexander Hamilton was trying to pay off $79 million in combined war debt of the states and the federal government. Pennsylvania had tried that. They could never collect the tax either. Alexander Hamilton thought he could do better than Pennsylvania had. He had the power of the federal government behind him. They were going to create an infrastructure where they would collect these taxes. Wrong again.
Yeah.
But let's talk about whiskey and currency. And
Right.
here we are in a place where rye grows really well. People who came from Europe knew what to do with rye. They knew how to distill. In this area, 1791, counties of Washington, Allegheny, Fayette, and Westmoreland County was estimated to have 500 to 700 stills.
Wow.
That was the kind of the inventory that Hamilton was using. In actuality, most stills were unregistered, and there were probably 3,000 to 5,000 stills
Wow.
in the area.
So they basically only had about 10% of the estimated number of stills that were actually accounted for.
That's right.
Okay.
They only legally registered 600 to 700 stills in 1791 when the excise tax
Yeah.
came in. A Pittsburgh shop ledger from 1798 shows 90% of the purchase settled in kind: whiskey, rye, butter, bacon, or labor.
Yeah. So that's what people were using in order to buy their goods and trade. It was all barter. So what would happen if you had a still, you were caught with it, right, unregistered, and you didn't have the money, because obviously no one did, to pay the $250 fine? What would be the consequences of not paying that?
Well, first of all, the way Hamilton set this up is he divided Pennsylvania into 4 districts. And he did that, all the states had districts. And each district had a head guy. The head guy here was a guy by the name of General John Nettle, who had been an associate with Washington. He was a very respected guy in the area, and initially he didn't like the tax.
Yeah.
But Washington says, poof, you're in charge of collecting this. You've got to find people. You got to open up offices. You got to get people to come in and register their stills. Every time they make whiskey, they can't sell it unless you give them a certificate that
Yeah.
shows they've paid. Everything has to be in ledgers. Everything you do with whiskey has to be recorded. So there was all this recording required. Some of these people from Ireland, Scotland, and Germany they couldn't write.
Yeah.
So you didn't register still, you didn't pay the tax, you're bartering just to exist.
Right.
For simple things, a bolt of cloth or some sugar, and here's this guy that Neville has appointed as a collector. Those guys never got out of the stocks. They were immediately harassed. They were tarred and feathered. They were threatened with their families' homes being destroyed.
Wow.
Not many people wanted to be a collector.
Yeah.
And Tom the Tinker that Dave told you about
Right.
said, you want to open a revenue office in somebody's house? And we'll see that never works.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
nobody was collecting.
So no one was able to collect, which means that there were, really no penalties, right?
Well, there's a recess space. The act does call for confiscation of property and a variety of different things, but they were
Okay.
very heavy fines. But there's no way these people could have paid those fines.
Right.
So
And no one to collect them because
Yeah.
that was such a, they made
Well,
sure.
they made an extreme effort in southwestern Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
hosted by Alexander Hamilton, urging George Washington to do something here and make a statement.
Right.
It was close to Philadelphia, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
And they get to here. And so there was some accusations against the federal government, particularly Hamilton, that he incited all of this to make a, quote, uprising, that we could show our mighty federal strength by putting that down.
Yeah.
So there's some people who speculate, there's quite a few authors on the subject on Whiskey Rebellion who feel this is very, very true, but this is all made up to give the country an excuse to show how powerful they were. I got to admit, a 13,000 member army coming across the mountains against, at no point was there more than 7,000 rebels on their arms.
Right.
And,
If you were
disastrous.
wanting to send an army, would you want them to go into the mountains of North Carolina
No.
or in Kentucky? Pennsylvania was not unique.
Right.
No one was very successful.
Not a single tax collector ever stepped foot in Kentucky, by the way. Just thought I'd let you know that. I don't know if you knew that or not.
I don't think I did know
I
that.
have read that a couple different sources that nobody wanted to live there and collect the taxes, and nobody was willing to cross into Kentucky to collect taxes there. They were
Interesting. Well, because we were also a part of Virginia for a very long time, and then became a state in 1792. So right around all the time that this was happening, right? We were kind of, I'm sure, going through a lot of the similar things.
But I don't think I ever collected a cent out of Kentucky on the whiskey tax.
Okay.
Washington's frustrated. Alexander Hamilton wants to make an example somewhere and show that this could work. He's whispering in Washington's ear, saying, we can't let this go unchecked. He said in September 1792, if the laws of the Union are not to be executed, the government itself is at an end.
Wow. Okay. It's a great quote.
And so here you have all these democratic societies that they're meeting, they're talking about, they believe in the federal government. They believe they have the right to petition their government because they don't like this. And so that was happening. There were big meetings, and the movers and shakers of the area would put their grievances to Congress. Well, after a little while, Congress tried to change the law. They knew that they needed to tamp down this reaction.
So back here we actually have things that deal with the federal militia. So at the end of the rebellion, when the government decided to finally put down the insurrection, they sent a federal militia out. So a lot of these have to do with the transportation of different items across the rivers that were here. So this is kind of tied to the negative side of the rebellion, in my opinion. The end of it when the army put it down. So I honestly love the whole museum. It really gives a great understanding of the Whiskey Rebellion. To me, there are a few key pieces that are in here that I love to talk about. The whiskey gauge of John Holcroft, the setup of what a still looked like. A farmer's still out in the woods was way different than what a production still would be like today. And then also the flags, to talk about the flags of the Whiskey Rebellion, what the farmers carried and what we call the Whiskey Rebellion flag today. So these flags are related to the Whiskey Rebellion. The one on top is what you would have seen the farmers carrying, at least different variations of it. Sometimes they did have writing on it, sometimes it was just the red and white stripes. But you would see 7 stripes, 7 stars. That represents the 7 counties of the West in both Pennsylvania and Virginia that were really heavily involved in this insurrection in the rebellion. These were simple made flags, not made out of silk or anything. They're very basic made with the materials they had. And this is what they would have carried around, what they would have flown on the top of Liberty poles when they marched to John Neville's house to protest the tax. This is what they would have had. Now, the flag down below is the one that's most closely associated with the Whiskey Rebellion, and it's what everybody calls the Whiskey Rebellion flag. The original of which is hanging not too far from here in Scenery Hill, Pennsylvania, in the old Century Inn. But even though everybody calls it the Whiskey Rebellion flag, and for years they talk about, oh, this is the flag of the rebels, it's actually a federal flag. So most likely a CAV unit, part of the rebellion, part of the militia that was coming out here to put down the rebellion. It was a guidon that they carried out with them because it's made out of silk and it has the federal eagle on it. But that flag survives because during a fire, the owner of the Century Inn, when it had caught fire, ran back in to grab that flag and save it. And so it still exists, the original one, but it is one of only two that we know of that were carried during the Whiskey Rebellion that still exist. Unfortunately, both of them were carried by the federal militia, not by the farmers, because most likely after the rebellion, these flags were tucked away, burnt, thrown away. They didn't want to be wanting anybody to know they were part of it later on. So
these were done in 1935 by Malcolm Parcell, and it is the largest remaining collection of his artwork in one place. So Malcolm was born in Claysville, but stayed mainly here in Washington County. He had a home called Moonlorn, where he built up and he did all his painting there. But the idea of it is to show the different pieces of the history.
Dave talked about the fact that you couldn't raise an army. Well, the only way people were safe out here is there was a militia, and every place had its own militia. Every male was part of a militia. And it's kind of like Walmart, every 20 miles there's a militia.
Yeah, because they had to. They had to protect the area.
Had some place to retreat to when the Indians were around. So these militias often got tied up in this democratic societies. In Washington, PA, it was the lawyers and the more well-to-do.
Yeah.
In Mingo Creek, it was the guys who were running after the tax collectors and tarring and feathering.
Yeah.
So David Bradford and his guys could kind of rise above the fray of the tarring and feathering.
Right.
But they could suggest to the Mingo Creek militia or the Mingo Creek Democratic Society what they would want to do. And those were the guys that got all the people, all the rebels, to band together. And it's kind of like a big union. Everyone knew that they better not register their still. They better not do any of this stuff, or there was consequences.
Yeah.
The Mingo Society actually set up a government of their own, had their own judges, had their own police, basically militia officers, stuff like that. Your complaints and everything were brought to the founders of this thing, and so it was a community unto its own out there practically. And John Holcroft was quite a leader in that in the Mingo Society, and that's where most of the rabid stuff came from.
Yeah.
So there were separations of thought all around the place. Albert Gallatin was involved in the Whiskey Rebellion. He was one of those wealthier types, and he actually pacified the rebels at a time when they had to make a decision whether they're going to meet this 13,000-man army in the mountains and destroy them there, as David Bradford thought would be a good idea, or to just settle back and take what the government would give them. And Albert talked at Whiskey Point, a whole gathering of representatives from all the counties involved in the issue, and basically convinced them to go home. And ultimately everybody was pardoned.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the presidential pardon, he pardoned Ellie, but George pardoned everybody in the thing, except for David Bradford.
Okay.
Yes, he never pardoned David Bradford.
Bespoke and Bond is a refined venue space in the heart of downtown Bardstown. From intimate gatherings to elevated events, this is where your story starts. If you're planning your next experience, visit bespokeandbond.com for more.
Hi, I'm Jim Huff. One of the founders of Liberty Pole Spirits here in Washington, Pennsylvania.
From rebellion to revival, Liberty Pole Spirits carries that defiant legacy forward, bringing bold, grain-driven Pennsylvania whiskey back to life.
To Liberty Pole!
Cheers.
Cheers, guys!
Cheers.
What do you guys do here at the company?
So we are an almost 10-year-old family-owned craft whiskey distillery. We make Pennsylvania pot distilled whiskey that we're very proud of. And we're sitting here in our meeting house, which is kind of patterned after a 18th century colonial meeting house during the Whiskey Rebellion era.
Well, I feel like it's a real privilege. I think that Jim's idea to revitalize what happened here in 1794 in a very young country. There's a lot of the law that was formed around rye whiskey in a very young country, and I'm honored that Jim decided to do this. I'm only saying that because there might have been a time where I said, "You're crazy," but now I think that it really does honor Pennsylvania and the people that are here. My job here is, I've always felt as the mom that I keep the family in tune to what we have. You do not want to be a gimmick. You want to honor what happened here. So the tasting room was my design based on what you would have encountered in 1794. And then my feeling is it's where Jim and I could enjoy a good glass of whiskey in front of the fireplace. And how many nights have we done that, honey? Where we've enjoyed a beautiful evening of just sipping on some whiskey that we made. I love the fact that my sons are involved. I love seeing them develop, and I love their tastes. I love everyone has a different feel for whiskey, and I think as a family, the four of us are magical in that when you, as a consumer, experiences our whiskey, you will experience the very beauty of the family and all the characteristics of everything about us.
Hey, my name's Kevin. This is my brother Rob. Rob makes all the whiskey. I help a little bit here and there, and welcome to Liberty.
So we're the distillers here at Liberty Pole Spirits.
It was Mom and Dad's, kind of dream to do this, and they started talking about wanting to have someone else help out a little bit. And Rob and I, at the time, we were young, and we weren't married at the time, and if it all went to pot, we'd be okay to go find something else. So we said we'd love to join, and we quit our jobs. Rob was first, and I was a month or two after that.
So it was my crazy idea to start a distillery, and we can talk more about the origin story. For Father's Day, 20 years ago or so, Ellen came to me and said, "Hey, Rob and Kevin, they want to get you a beer brewing kit, a home brewing kit."
And how old were they at the time?
Middle school.
Junior high.
Yeah, middle school.
Yeah,
Junior
they were
high.
younger. They already knew you were passionate. They were ready.
And so I said, I don't really want to brew beer. I want to learn how to distill whiskey. So if you're going to get me that sort of a gift, find a still somewhere. So they gave me for Father's Day a 10-gallon copper moonshine still, which we still have out in our production area. And it was a fun hobby. Rob and Kevin, who you have or will talk to later, they're engineers, they're science kids, and so in middle school, this was a big science experiment for the whole family, right? We learned fermentation, we learned distillation. I mean, it was like being, at a magnet school for science, and it was fun, and that's all I ever really intended. I wanted a hobby, and so I never intended to really take this to this level, but this is where we have ended up.
So both of our backgrounds is in engineering. So whenever it came time to actually start firing up the boilers, working with the steam lines to the stills, working with the steam lines to the mash cooker, it was kind of a natural fit. My favorite part is whenever you think about making whiskey, you mill the grains, you cook the grains, which breaks starches down into sugars, you ferment it, which breaks sugars down into alcohol, you distill it, which separates some flavors out from other ones. Once you put it through all those processes, which do nothing but break down and separate out flavors, if you're able to do all that and still taste what you made it out of, that's definitely my favorite part. Whenever you taste the white whiskey, yep, there's the rye whiskey that we milled 2 weeks ago.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, mine would be very similar too. I mean, I think it's cool. It's neat being a manufacturer. I'm a very hands-on kind of person, and taking very few ingredients and just the range of flavors that you can create based on how you're taking those 4 ingredients is something that's cool to me. I love that.
I was in the technology world, and as you get older, technology moves so fast, and I just lost the desire and the edge to kind of keep up with rapidly evolving technology, and I was kind of burning out. And at the same time, I was kind of making some pretty good whiskey. We were having fun, and I used to golf a lot, and I had 3 very good buddies that we would golf together, and they had been bugging me, to bring some of my home distilled whiskey there. And so I said, sure. So one day we finished up our round, and I took actually the peated bourbon that Ellen loves, and we sat around after the 18 holes, and I had 2 friends who, and I say this very affectionately because I am a Pittsburgher, I am a Yinzer, right? That's our affectionate term for Pittsburghers. And we're sort of a shot in a beer crowd. So my 2 Yinzer friends, boom, they downed it. Yeah, it's pretty good. But my other buddy, he's a Brit. His name is Ian. He is from Liverpool. You would think if you were talking to him with blinders on, you were talking to Paul McCartney. He's never lost his British accent, and he's a whiskey lover. This guy, Ian, loves whiskey, and so he took this glass, and he was swirling it, and he was nosing it, and he was sipping it, and I'm thinking, my God, Ian, do you like it or do you not like it? And eventually he got to the bottom of it, he finished it, he slammed the glass on the table and said, "That's bloody fantastic." And I went home that night to Ellen, and I said, "Oh, I think we have something."
Ellen, how did you feel about that? What was your initial response? Because I just saw how you are now. But what was your initial response to your husband coming up and saying, "I think we have something"?
Well, it's illegal to own a still.
Allegedly, I had.
So there's that. You're teaching your children, and I'm begging them, please do not tell your teachers. But I do have to say that there was something special about the fact that no one had honored the Whiskey Rebellion. No one had done anything about it. And here I'm facing my husband who's saying, maybe we could make this happen. Why has no one else done it? And you, of course, coming from Kentucky, you know how important the bourbon industry is and how beautiful it is.
Absolutely.
And how many beautiful bourbons we've had. And so I did agree with Jim, why has no one honored the rye whiskey history that's equally as valuable in the American history books as bourbon? Why has no one understood that? And I think that the only person that wins in all of that is the consumer. So you have to say, here's a guy who says, I have this great Pennsylvania rye and this great Pennsylvania bourbon. And I looked at Jim and I'm like, could he be the guy? Could he be the guy? If we try really hard. So that is exactly how it went. The 2 of us were like, we're gonna try really hard to do something that is absolutely valuable to the United States and to the consumer. And so I'm actually proud to be part of it. I'm proud of the way my boys look at it too. They're not in it just for money. They're in it because they feel like there is a history. Bourbon is so great in the United States. Rye whiskey deserves that, but you have to have the good producers. And I love being part of that.
Besides making a lot of rye,
Yeah.
right, being in Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
we think the big thing that we are really proud of and what we really think kind of defines us is the batch pot distillation. Right, so instead of using the continuous column stills, we're really into, as you can see behind the 2 pot stills, right, which really does a good job going back to my favorite part of preserving those grain flavors.
Right.
All kind of plays hand in hand there. So that's probably our thing that I think sets us apart.
Yeah, I think it's cool because pot stills are so nuanced, right? And depending on the barometric pressure for the day, for the temperature in the atmosphere, how you make your cuts, the pace that you're running it at, they are finicky, for lack of a better term, but it's such a cool way to make a whiskey, and it's just something that we've kind of fallen in love with in terms of the, call it the artistic nature of it, however, right? But they're hard to run, and it's worth pursuing the perfecting it, right?
So you all started this, a while ago, right? Do you feel like once you started, there were other people that started taking hold, or did you all start and other people were already in there? Like what point, where do y'all fit into that narrative?
So I like to say that we are part of the second wave of craft distilling, right? We stand on the shoulders of giants, right? The guys like, St. George and Few Spirits and Dad's Hat and Wiggle in Pennsylvania. There were people that started in that 2010, 2012 era. We opened our doors in 2016, so we're kind of that second wave. If you go to one of our peers, and I say peers and not competitors, if you go to one of our craft peers and you have a really bad experience, you're probably not going to come to visit me, right? So I want all of our peers to produce great whiskey and to give great experiences, because that's going to give people a good feeling, and they're going to come and visit me. And likewise, if we're the first place they visit, I want them to come visit you. And so because of that, we were very much helped by the guys that came before us. We've tried our best to help those that have followed us, because we're all in this together. We're not competing with each other, and not that we're competing with the heritage brands in Kentucky, but we kind of are. They're more of our kind of competition than our local craft distillers.
Well, I also think that as a whiskey drinker, I want several different good bottles.
Yeah.
And I want my girlfriends to come over and we're all sitting around, what's your newest good bottle? So that's bourbon. That's Pennsylvania Rye.
Yeah.
Whatever I could get that's really good benefits me and my friends.
We started in 2016. I feel like the first time we put away on-spec Liberty Pole whiskey was mid-2020. So
Yeah.
about 4 years after that. So there's a 4-year kind of learning curve. And then you have to let it age for 4 years after that.
Right.
So if you do the math, it was, summer of last 2024 was whenever we first started putting out 4-year-old on-spec Liberty Pole. So that's kind of I don't know how many hours it's been, but it was almost a decade before we got to the point where we're like, yep, I think this is exactly what we want it to be.
Yeah.
But that being said, you still monitor, and who knows?
Well, it's almost one of those things too. I almost feel like the more we've learned, the more you realize there's still a lot more to learn, right? I feel
Absolutely.
like you get humbled enough times over the years, and yeah, you feel happy with where you're at, but then you're also like, wow, we've just scratched the surface. We haven't painted up on our wall. We're so proud and almost humbled of the history of Pennsylvania Rye, and so we've always loved the thought of helping to try to bring back the Pennsylvania Rye. And so it's been a year and a half now. We started doing our foolproof, we call it foolproof Monongahela Rye. And we go into the barrels at 108 proof. So it's our 108 proof barrel strength rye whiskey. And so that's, I think, what I'm most proud of.
Yeah, it's a really solid homage to the old-fashioned Monongahela Rye whiskey styles.
No
it's
corn
enough
mash
proof
still.
to give you kind of like a nice little flavor concentration there. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely one of our favorites. I'd say my other one is our single barrel program is so much fun for us. We don't do a ton of them, but every time we come across a barrel that's really extra fantastic or extra off profile, we're like, where did these green apples come from? You know, some weird like tertiary flavors. We have a lot of fun single barrel and put some fun names on them, send them out. So those two things are probably our favorite.
And I got one more too. The you know, one of the things that we'll have coming out more, and when this comes out, 2026, high rye bourbon. And so obviously rye is such an important thing to us. And
I was like, in Pennsylvania?
Yeah,
That's so weird.
Yeah. Well, and we have the most respect for Kentucky, right? And like Kentucky bourbon hasn't always been popular, right? And kind of understanding the history that Kentucky went through of the ups and downs of it, and we talked about, you know, we've talked about this where it's such a communal aspect, and we love everything about Kentucky. We were sitting around drinking a Kentucky rye that had 51% rye and a lot of corn, and we're like, this tastes a lot like more like the bourbon elements to it. And we're like, well, why don't we make a Pennsylvania style bourbon? Like what Pennsylvania is known for, the rye. And so we're like, let's go barely legal bourbon. So 51% corn, 40% rye, 9% malted barley. And it's kind of cool because it drinks. It is very the dichotomy of the two. You taste a little bit of the sweetness from the corn and the spiciness from the rye, and so I'm excited about that, a Pennsylvania style bourbon.
Well, I kind of think that whiskey, and you and I talked about this before, is triggered by memories. I love rum at the beach. I love, there's just tequila at the beach. There's just certain times for certain things, but I think you go through life and life is sometimes hard. And oftentimes you associate a difficult time with a really good whiskey. That whiskey got me through this particular situation. And I choose my whiskeys based on memories. And I don't know why. I don't choose vodka or gin based on memories, but I choose whiskey based on memories. And I think the great thing about being married to a whiskey producer is that he understands my memories and he understands my hardships. He's known me my whole life. And he goes, try this, Ellen, this will get you through. And it works every time.
There's two things that I've enjoyed over the years. I love the whiskey convert. So through Mom's Cocktails, I think she's the best cocktail crafter like anywhere. It's so cool, and we have a really cool cocktail program. So, and especially whenever we're putting out 5-gallon barrels of whiskey, 3-month-old, you know, our core guest was not a massive whiskey fan. And so we built our entire brand off of converting people into whiskey drinking through the cocktail program. And I love that. And I tell people, there's not much that I'm more confident in than if you don't like whiskey, I think we can convert you. I've seen it happen so many times that it's so possible. I love that. And then I think as we've kind of started to hit our stride, I think with the whiskey, I think I've found it very satisfying. If you're a long-time whiskey drinker, and the craft world can be tough. It can be hard to, I mean, there's so much learning curve behind it. And so I've also get probably, you know, equal satisfaction from a big whiskey fan, being like, oh, that tastes good. So I love both sides of that.
Yeah.
When we first opened, you found out that, or we found out, people would come in, I don't like whiskey. And so now I'm forced to try to sell them something they will drink. And I thought, I'll just call bartenders. Any bartender in Pittsburgh, give me a cocktail recipe. And it turns out that you call any bartender, and the majority of them at that time in 2016, here's how you make a whiskey old fashioned, and here's how you make a Manhattan. And I'm thinking to myself, but if I don't like Manhattans or old fashions,
if I don't like whiskey, I'm not gonna like
You're not gonna like
it.
exactly.
Right, absolutely.
So I found out I had to invent it myself. And so what you find is, and I have to say that I stand on the shoulders, I've read a lot of books of bartenders who understand whiskey.
Are there any that you want to shout out? Because I think a lot of people.
David Wonderich.
Beautiful.
From 1932, when the Volstead Act was was overturned. I mean, they were, during that time, during Prohibition, everybody was drinking vodka and rum cocktails. And so nobody, I mean, in 1960, we even heard stories of distilleries. That's Pappy's story, that people weren't drinking bourbon. They just weren't drinking it, so you lose. But in the end, what I found is, if you take what's in season, and you take the natural ingredients, and you just simply touch it to the whiskey, people will enjoy that more. I'm not trying to be a Long Island iced tea where there's every different whiskey or every different alcohol.
Thank goodness that's
Doesn't
not our
taste like tea. I want you to experience our whiskey in a very loving way, in which you taste the whiskey in the cocktail and that the flavoring ingredient is secondary. So what you're tasting today is one of our favorites. It's just simply, we take cranberries. It's Thanksgiving, right? Take cranberries, cook them with a couple of spices and some sugar. And then just simply add that as if you were making an old fashioned. And what I love about whiskey and learned was that in 1794, during the Whiskey Rebellion, that time people were giving whiskey to their children because they thought it was, like we do today, a vitamin. It helped them sleep, it cured infections, it's calmed them down. So everyone during the time of the Revolutionary War and afterwards were drinking whiskey for
And
its,
it was safer to drink than the water.
because they used the rivers for, they would throw away their garbage.
Because this was before modern
Oh.
filtration systems.
Yeah.
Oh, totally.
Right? And that's a big reason why people would migrate towards the places where there was clean, easy to drink water in order to make those
Springs.
things.
Right.
Springs.
There were a lot of springs here
Absolutely.
in Western Pennsylvania. So we now have all these children drinking whiskey. And the key was they would put sugar and some sort of fruit. In southwestern Pennsylvania, it was maple syrup, it was apple juice, it was honey was quite prevalent too. And so people would drink it with a little bit of sugar and fruit, right?
Yeah.
And then you have Prohibition, 1920. And no one drinks any more whiskey. In 1932, when it ended and people moved on, they would often go to the bartender and they would say, I will have my whiskey the old-fashioned way. Meaning that they wanted to have some sort of sugar and some sort of fruit. And
bitters.
hence we say old-fashioned.
Yes.
So I felt like I really heavily leaned into that. And as we've moved, I now have 48 cocktails that are basically, you could call it a sour. You can call it a highball. You could do whatever you want, but basically it's the same thing it always was. It's some sort of flavoring fruit and some sort of sugar. Well, I just wanted to say that I feel like it's a real privilege. I think that my husband and my sons both honor the history, but they also realize the same thing that I do, that people who drink whiskey are rather, I don't want to say sophisticated, but I want to say sophisticated.
Particular.
In that they know, exactly, particular, in that they know the flavor compounds, they know the entire chemistry that goes into it. I'm so amazed at our customers and how they love us for our efforts. And I don't think you get that with any other spirit. And so that makes me want to be better at my efforts. It makes Jim, it makes the boys, everybody's got to be better at their efforts, because there are people that really, truly respect the efforts.
The craft.
And you and I both have laughed about this. Like, you don't get that with vodka. You don't get that with other spirits. There's moments when you need the other spirits, but life is measured by the value of this great whiskey that you've tried. So it's an honor to be part of that situation, and it's every single day, it's an honor to try to make it better.
It's a interesting variation from sort of the industrial age of Monongahela rye, where they were typically aging them in these dunnage style or stone brick warehouses that were heated. And it's something that we're curious about. You know, and there's certainly probably a difference from a constant high temperature, and so there'll be some things in the works to evaluate that internally.
I guess it's fair to say, like, we don't think that our way is the only right way, but this is the only way we want to do it.
I love that. That's a great way to say it.
Yeah. And so far, so we have 2.5 years of experience under this rick house, so by no means 4, 6, 8, 15. But through 2.5 years, it seems to be playing into what we expected. First and foremost is with these pot stills, we make such a rich, viscous whiskey that for us, the oxygen getting into the barrel, that oxidation is probably the most important step in the maturation for us.
Break that down a little bit more for me.
So as you have whiskey that sits in a barrel, you obviously have these additive kind of things that are going on where the oak flavors are being absorbed into the barrels.
Right.
Also, oxygen's permeating the barrel, working its way into the whiskey, and then helping to esterify some longer chain fatty acids and creating a little more esters in there. Because we knew we wanted these barrels stored horizontally. You just have a little more surface area for the oxygen to hit.
Right.
So we started doing the math on how to store them horizontally, and it doesn't really add up that well inside of a rick house unless you start palletizing and stacking high. So we knew we needed to go high with it. And that's what led us into this rick-style rick houses. They need to be on their side, and then we need to go so high. That's really the only way to do it safely. And then you start thinking it through, and so we're big proponents of blending. So it's whenever a certain batch hits the shelf, it's not just the 4 oldest barrels, or it's not a random selection. It's 4 to 6 to 7, like really intentionally selected barrels that mix together to form a predictable profile. And we've noticed that if we have more tools in the toolbox, we can hit our predictable profile a little better. Okay. So that's whenever it started coming together, we're like, well, if you have first floor aging versus fifth floor aging, more tools in the toolbox. And right around this time, our single barrel program was also getting really popular. Yeah. And we knew that, like, in order to get more exciting single barrels, like, there's just no reason not to do this, right? Yeah. And so that's where we ended up kind of putting in that first through 5 floors. Yeah, it's worked out really well so far.
So what are you all drinking right now? What did you all choose?
So actually, in my glass, I have a port finished rye whiskey. We are going to, and this is going to air after this has been released, but we do a triple single barrel release on the day before Thanksgiving. And this year's theme, because we do a theme every year, is finished whiskeys. And so we've done a tawny port finished rye whiskey that I just think is magical. I've always been a big fan of High West Midwinter Night's Dram. This is kind of our version of that, the pot distilled rye whiskey. It's beautiful. I think rye whiskey, we're rye whiskey evangelists. We love rye whiskey. We love Pennsylvania rye whiskey. Besides being a great whiskey on its own, it really works well with finishing barrels. And so we have a lot of fun.
Why do you think that is? What do you think the characteristics of rye?
I think rye has a body and a boldness that it doesn't get overwhelmed. It doesn't get overly sweetened, or depending on the barrel that you're using. Rye whiskey never is secondary in a party, right?
Right.
You always know that there's a rye whiskey in that glass. And that's what I think is so beautiful about finishing rye whiskeys is, there's beautiful port finish on this. We have a mead finish. At the very basic core of what that whiskey is, there's rye there. And that's what I love most about using rye whiskey in a finishing project.
At the heart of it, we're rye whiskey drinkers. We're so glad to be in Pennsylvania, where that's an easy decision to make. Love the spice, the breadiness. So probably more often than not rye. But that being said, sometimes you're in the mood for a more like our bourbon has such like a rich, sweet corn flavor with a good bit of that like raspberry fruitiness to it. And sometimes you just want something a little softer. And You know,
So people just need to buy all of it. That way you can figure out where you're going to drink as you want to drink it.
I will say what we're really proud of is between all the different products here, there's a huge variation, whether you go from a rye to a wheated bourbon, let alone the high rye bourbon that's coming out, not to mention the smokes and the peated bourbons, and then some of these finished and double oaks. But what's cool with all that variation, there's also very distinct house character. Yeah. So you can taste Liberty Pole in every single one of them, which I think we're pretty proud of.
Whitney, we were talking upstairs in the founder's room, and you kind of basically diagrammed our, thought pattern about introducing people to whiskey. You start off with a cocktail, and these seasonal cocktails that Ellen makes, they're seasonal, they're whiskey based, but they're not whiskey forward. So if you don't think you like whiskey, give this a shot, because you have that cranberry old fashioned, you're going to be surprised that there's 2 ounces of whiskey in there.
You're going to be really happy.
Yeah, exactly. So you like that, you think, okay, well maybe I'll try a Manhattan or an old fashioned, and then you like that, and maybe I'll just pour some whiskey over ice, and before you know it, you're able to drink whiskey neat, and you're now a whiskey drinker.
I think our biggest hope or goal is to bring back pot still culture in the United States. I mean, it doesn't seem that anyone has done that in a way that, in our opinions, shows the beauty of a pot still. Yeah. They are so cool, and there's so many cool flavors and rich viscosity. Whenever you drink a really well done pot distilled whiskey, I mean, it's so rich and complex. And I think that's our goal for the future, is to kind of bring back that pot distilled culture in the United States.
And lime rye whiskey.
And rye whiskey, yeah.
So you all don't use a column still here at all?
No, we'll be dead before column still.
I don't think you need to say it like that. But no, we're pot still. Yeah, that's our distillation of choice.
Give me pot still or give me death.
Exactly.
Put that on the wall.
We are excited for the future of Pennsylvania rye. I think it's something that's bigger than Liberty Pole. I mean, there's a lot of cool people in Pennsylvania doing awesome stuff, and rye as a category of whiskey is in a cool place, and it's a neat whiskey that has a lot of history and a lot of potential. So I think we're really excited about rye in general.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
And Liberty Pole making that rye, hopefully.
Hey, at least being a part of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep, exactly.
Exactly.
I think that's great. Cheers, y'all.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you so much.
Want to explore bourbon in a new way? The Parlor Room is an intimate tasting experience in the heart of downtown Bardstown. Here, it isn't just about what's in the glass, it's about the story behind it. From rare pours to thoughtfully curated glasses, every seat is designed to take you deeper into bourbon. Book your experience at parlorroomtastings.com.